All right, everyone. Hello and welcome back to Dan's Astrology. I'm your host, Dan. Today is March 23rd, 2025. We're heading into one of the biggest transits of the year. We've got a solar eclipse in Aries, and the day after, we've got Neptune ingressing into Aries. And we also just had a Venus Cazimi. Venus is retrograding back into Pisces at the same time. So that having just happened is sort of having a bearing on this as well. And um, I've been basically focusing on the solar eclipse and this ingress of Neptune into Aries, and I was kind of coming at this from the perspective of thinking of this recent Venus Cazimi, and there's an obvious sort of duality or sort of polarity here that has to do with yin and yang, or the idea of gender, of Venus being feminine planet and a very masculine sign, or a very yangy sign, and that there's some kind of underlying issue here with healing wounds around those kinds of gender things, I think. Because if you look especially at, the controversy around things like Elon Musk and the war against transgender people and all this kind of stuff, part of this comes from the fact that I've been doing. This is also going to be the last Aries solar eclipse before they're just in Virgo and Pisces, and so we just had a lunar eclipse in Virgo. So there's this kind of like, we're in this transition into out of this Aries Libra axis into this Pisces Virgo axis. And over the last 18 months, I've been working on this idea of what do eclipses mean for Aries. How do the eclipses play off the Aries archetype? And not only that, but also keeping in mind that Chiron has been in Aries the whole time. And so I've done some of the previous videos I did, I was working off this idea of what does it mean that the wounded healer is in Aries, right? What does it mean that the wounded healer is in the sign of the warrior, the sign of Mars, right? And there's something about also this kind of thing that obviously there's this underlying issue when it comes to astrology and Venus and Mars and yin and yang, in that everybody has Mars in their chart somewhere, everybody has Venus in their chart somewhere, everybody has the moon in their chart somewhere. There's all sorts of everybody's got some kind of feminine energy going on in their horoscope, and yet there's this kind of there's this kind of way that the whole problems around gender have been capitalized on basically by the forces of fascism, right? And I think this is also another issue, obviously, heading into this eclipse cycle, because there's been so many things going on in the news with Donald Trump and the American presidency and stuff like that, I start to wonder, if I'm making an astrology video, what is going to be my approach to dealing with the problem of fascism, how to address it, how upfront to be about it. Do you just call it a spade, or do you play coy about it, or like what's the strategy for dealing with this, right? And there's also, I think there's another underlying issue here, which is like, is fascism too strong of a word to use, or is it completely appropriate to sound the alarm bells about what's going on? But then there's this kind of underlying issue where, when we're just talking about things on the internet, I think part of what characterizes this moment is that, it's not 2017. It's like there's this kind of idea that during the first Trump presidency, I don't know, I tried to express my political view as best I could and try to convince people of, one way or another about different political beliefs, concern about what was happening and stuff like that. But it doesn't seem to do very much good. I mean, it seems to the people who it maybe helps reinforce people who already think that way, but it doesn't seem to have any effectiveness in converting anybody to think any differently about anything. So there seems to be a kind of a futility about dealing with it at that level. But I think I don't know, I think it's still helpful to at least sort of point out exactly how it works, or how it's an issue and why it's relevant to these eclipses. And I would just like to say, first of all, that I made my last video when I was talking about the lunar eclipse in Virgo. My family has been going through some obviously things that have been timed up with this eclipse, such as my mother and my sister are both equestrian enthusiasts, and they just lost a horse, but it was an old horse that had lived a long, good life. So it was one of these things where it was just the time had come kind of thing. So there's nothing really too unusual about that, but I'm kind of in this position of, there's a lot of stuff going on in my family with changes around, the horse situation and dealing with horse grief, and also with deaths in the extended family and stuff like that. And I was basically that level of it, this sort of familial, more personal level, had my attention when I was making my last video. And the current issues going on at the more collective or the more political level, it just seems like there's been such a barrage of stuff coming from the United States that I wasn't completely, I'm not taking the approach of like Chris Brennan and Austin Coppock with the astrology podcast. They do they're very impressive the way that they go over the current events in a very methodical, meticulous way. I'm not exactly doing that, but I could at least see that what seems to have the main event that seems to have timed up around the lunar eclipse and now heading into this solar eclipse in Aries is the deportation of a parent Tren de Aragua, or Trump invoking the Hostile Enemies Act to deport people. And there's a really controversial thing where even a judge ordered the planes to just fly back, to cancel it out. And there's this kind of issue here about Trump being able to just bypass over all checks and balances or all kinds of legal due process and basically just do whatever he wants because they claim that because he got the popular vote, because it's democracy, then he's allowed to just overturn basically all the legal safeguards that are in place, right? And that there's this actual movement in the right wing specifically to just topple over the whole American judiciary system, the whole American political system, and basically like blow everything up and start over from scratch, basically, right? Which is kind of concerning, but that could be like go with this archetype of the eclipse season, because there's this idea that the sun being like the leader, being the king or something like that, being eclipsed, or like there being the whole leadership process is just wacky all of a sudden, right? Or so that's a very much, I think, a part of this. There's also, of course, if you use tarot with astrology, you've got the emperor archetype being associated with Aries, the idea of the emperor being like, he answers only to God. He's God's representative on Earth. So it's kind of like if you take a position of occasionalism, the only thing that can happen in reality is what God allows. So that if you do have a fascist totalitarian dictator, it's only because God wills it. And then if you ended up in a fascist theocracy state, the fascist dictator can do whatever you want. And if you disagree with it, then that just means you are a heathen, and you are, that God is always right. So that if the ruler is always right because God is always right. And if you disagree with the ruler, then you are evil and you are a sinner, basically, right? And because that's basically what we're headed towards. Because if you combine the post-democratic emperor thing with the American fascist theocracy state. You basically have a totalitarian fascist theocracy, which with Neptune going into Aries, it's something to be concerned about, right? So with that in mind, if you look at some of the elements around I'm not, rather than approaching it from the direct political level, what I'm interested in this video is analyzing some of the underlying archetypal dynamics underneath that, particularly Chiron, the wounded healer in Aries, the wounded healer in the sign of the warrior, right? So what does that make you think about? I think about the warrior, I think about mixed martial arts, I think about Joe Rogan, I think about the whole, culture around tough masculinity, right? And there's this appearance of Zuckerberg on the Joe Rogan podcast, where Zuckerberg has rebranded himself, restyled himself, and is presenting this thing that is, I think it's a really good example of the problem of what I would call a kind of like oligarchical fascism, because there's this idea of what I'm going to be doing in this video anyways, is like taking the question seriously, right? Taking the question of toxic masculinity seriously as something to sit with and analyze and contemplate, versus whatever, if you're an elite and you are one of the people who owns one of the most powerful tech media, social media companies in the world, and you're appearing on a podcast, there's this kind of question is like, if Zuckerberg is just playing that situation for what it is, and in that situation, it's not really about taking the idea or the topic of conversation seriously, but simply like maybe you have a team of people who write a script to tell you what to say that would go good with this image that you're trying to put on, and they tell people what they want, and it's obviously just very artificial, right? But basically, anyways, Zuckerberg went on Joe Rogan's podcast and he said something. I'm assuming that I'm just doing this off memory, but he said something like, a misconstrual of toxic masculinity being that, say, or this idea that like he wants to stand up for that it's okay to be masculine, and that it was like there are all these people out there who think that masculinity is toxic. Like how could masculinity be toxic? Like they think masculinity is toxic, but we want to say that it's okay to be a man. It's okay for boys to be boys. It's okay. You know what I'm trying to say? Like that was the message that Mark Zuckerberg was putting out, and it's obviously just retarded. Or I mean, well, okay, I'm even being a bit like loose with how I'm speaking, right? Because there's a certain there's this whole issue about like political correctness, I guess, right? Or that there's this idea of when the liberals had the power structure, there was a certain idea of liberal progressiveness that was like wanting to move away from toxic masculinity, and obviously that liberal structure seems to be giving out, and there's a conservative structure which doesn't understand it, basically, right? And from the point of view of Mark Zuckerberg, the point isn't to have an interesting conversation where you actually get into it. It's basically just to present some sort of image to make yourself palatable with the new where the popularity is at, right? And the thing about this, which I find interesting, is that if you watch the kind of media reaction, is that it seems like, when I think about this is the kind of problem about why I'm calling this a kind of oligarchical fascism, is because it's a kind of like way of presenting yourself where you're not taking your audience, you're not treating your audience like they are intelligent people. You're treating your audience like they're a bunch of morons, right? And that even the fascists, people accuse the fascists of just being appealing to the most stupid level. But if you look at people who could be maybe accused of being fascists, like Steve Bannon, and then that that block, you would say. Like, you could say that that in the Trump regime, the MAGA regime, there are different factions. You could say that Slavoj Zizek made this joke recently about how you could say that within the MAGA Trump regime, you've basically got the right-wing tech oligarchs, such as Jeff Bezos, such as Elon Musk, such as Mark Zuckerberg, and this is the right-wing tech oligarchy of the MAGA movement. And then you've got basically the left wing of MAGA, or the MAGA communists, which would be like Steve Bannon. And these guys basically are, from Steve Bannon's point of view, the value of Trump is basically standing up for the working class, right? And it's like the working class that's being taken advantage of by all these sort of like these elite tech oligarch, really powerful people who basically don't respect the working class, think they're a bunch of idiots, and basically talk down to them, or like think that all they need to present to the working class to be taken seriously is to just change your image a bit, and say some bullshit about how masculinity isn't toxic, and then all that whole demographic, because they're so stupid, they'll just they'll just support you automatically without thinking twice about it. But from Steve Bannon's point of view, he sees the value of Trump as being for the working class, and that the working class aren't actually that stupid. That the working class are smart enough to see that the fact that they can get Trump elected shows that the liberal elite power structure has been upset, that the working class isn't buying for the status quo, and that Steve Bannon is basically saying that the wealthy tech oligarch elite are basically just scrambling at the feet to suck up to Trump because they're scared that they don't want to be the target of this big switch up, this big change that's happening, right? So there's this kind of thing that if there's this kind of issue here that makes the Trump administration seem, or this whole strategy that they're taking, seem to be kind of crazy, because the whole idea that if you swing it in this sort of like the leftist, the MAGA left, the MAGA communist direction, like the reason why I'm saying MAGA communism is because if you follow through on this entirely, that the Bannon set up Trump to fight for the working class, and that the whole, all this trade war and all this kind of stuff is just their way of trying to bring the manufacturing base back to America. If they actually succeed in this, what they're going to be able to do is have a American working class that actually, if so much of the world's car production is from America, and the working class actually they're responsible for that, they now have striking power, right? And then you now have a kind of an opportunity to have a real left-wing working class resurgence that actually has some balls behind it, because it's not just about trying to be like, take pity on me and give me my my privileges to my different queer identity politics. They actually have some balls being like we're going to negotiate things, and that negotiation isn't just based on us being guilt tripping you to taking pity for us because we're so oppressed. It's that you do what we want, or we'll strike and we'll fuck up the whole economy, right? That we actually have, if they actually win, they get some balls and they get to set up a real leftist working class movement, and that actually would be a good thing, right? But the problem is that all the reason why Elon Musk joined MAGA is because he really doesn't like unions, and also Jeff Bezos doesn't really like unions, right? So you've got this sort of there's this inner division in MAGA itself, where the people who want to strengthen the working class versus the people who want to treat them like they're a bunch of idiots and make sure that they don't unionize. So, I mean, I don't know. That's a more just like blunt getting into the politics of it. But like underneath this, there's an archetype to do with the whole appeal to the culture war around gender and masculinity and all this kind of stuff. And that, like, I think that my approach to this video is I'm just going to take this issue seriously. And instead of treating my audience like they're a bunch of idiots who are I honestly think we're entering my issue with a lot of conservative politics is that when I listen to somebody, like I'm a Canadian and we're going to have an election soon. When I listen to Pierre Poilievre talk, it sounds like what he's trying to do is take a complex situation and simplify it because he basically assumes that anybody listening to him is like a pea-brained moron who has no ability to be able to understand the actual complexities of the situation. So he has to like reduce it to something that's so simple, so basic that like it's like talking to a child. But like in the process of him doing this, it's like what he's actually presenting isn't actually really. It's not really true. It's like and it starts to be like, you start to wonder, is he smart enough to translate something complicated to a bunch of people who aren't very smart? Or is he basically just one idiot talking to a bunch of other idiots and they actually don't know what's going on, right? Like, I'm honestly really concerned that, like, to have, just listening to, like, the way that Pierre Poilievre presents himself, the way that he speaks, the way that he talks to the audience, the way he imagines, like, this is what everybody's like, and this is I'm their leader, and it's like it's like the blind leading the blind, a bunch of like the idiot king leading the army of morons. Like, what a fucking hopeless society if that's the way things are, right? If that is the case, maybe Canada does deserve to be taken over. If we're that stupid to elect Pierre Poilievre, maybe we're just better off to maybe we don't deserve to have sovereignty if we're that fucking dumb, right? So what I'm trying to say is that rather than doing that, like, to be generous with my audience or to make the best assumptions of the capacity of whoever is watching and start from that point, right? And that even people who you would think are, only in it because they're a bunch of morons, what if they're smarter than you think? And that would be, why didn't we encourage the part of them that's intelligent rather than appealing to the dumb part of them, right? That's what I think, what seems to make sense to me, to try to encourage people to develop the part of themselves that's intelligent and critical and can see the bullshit rather than just trying to feed people more bullshit and make people more stupid, right? So with this in mind, last night I watched a movie. I rewatched a movie called The Dance of Reality, which is a Jodorowsky movie, and there's something about this movie which I think plays into this idea about the whole issue about taking this issue about masculinity and toxic masculinity seriously, right? Because I think there's something about it's kind of I don't want to spoil it too much, but I'm gonna have to. You're just gonna have to. There's gonna be obvious spoilers. I'm not gonna hold back on this one. But there's some kind of there's the issue about from the get go. Jodorowsky presents himself in the story. It's kind of an autobiography or not really so much about him, but him talking about his father, right? And I think one of this, like a lot of it plays with this idea of left-wing and right-wing coding, or what we invest in these ideas around communism and fascism. And I honestly, even though I take the threat of fascism seriously, I do actually sometimes wonder if the critics of fascism overuse the word, right? And I mean, I've got this book here, Deleuze and Guattari. I'm a big Deleuze Guattarian reader, and these guys were, if it's Deleuze and Guattari, or if it's what the Frankfurt School guys. I haven't read as much of those guys, but like there's this tendency amongst like leftist intellectuals to just make everything fascist. Like everything's fascist, right? Like my neighbors playing their radio too loudly is fascist, or like my you know, there's these guys that like, it's kind of funny, like there's like all these landscape crews around, and one of the landscape crews that I always see doing landscaping on my street is called, well, hopefully this doesn't dox me, but there's this landscape crew called Above the Rest, right? And I always kind of wonder, is it like, what's the reasoning behind this, the name choice? Is it that like, it's like, okay, first of all, a cut above, right? A cut above the rest. They're cutting your lawn. They're doing it well. They're a cut above the rest. Okay? But then it's also like, is it also like, if you have enough money to pay other people to mow your lawn, you are a cut above these suckers who obviously, you know, if you're a grown adult and the best you can do is just fucking push a lawnmower around, you must be a fucking loser, right? You must be a fucking piece of shit. Yeah, okay, so I'm a cut above you because I can just pay you to do all this shit that I don't want to do, and then if you don't do a good job, you missed a spot, you little, you know, like, it's like, you know what I'm saying? Like, and that, or is it because like, because you can't cut your lawn as good as these guys can, right? Or like is this kind of thing where you just, sometimes it just feels like you're like, all these things which we just kind of like filter out and like take for granted is just like the world around, like everybody's just like, let's try to make our business as fascist as possible, right? Like, or there's another one where it's like, there's like another like truck for like a contractor where it's got like a Roman centurion helmet on it, and it's like, yeah, we're not just a bunch of like guys who are gonna go and do some construction work. We're a bunch of fucking soldiers. We'll fucking kill you. We're a bunch of tough guys. We're gonna go and like, you know, we're a fucking war machine, man. We don't fuck with us, man. We're just a bunch of you know, like, it's like, and like that's the environment we have to live in. Right? And it's like, this is like, you have a whole entertainment industry set up to reinforce this sort of like fascism that's just everywhere, right? So at some level, I'm not like, but I think it's like, what I'm trying to explain is like, I think there's this sort of, the Deleuze-Guattarians call it micro-fascism, right? Like there's like, everything is just permeated in this sort of micro-fascism to the extent that, like, you know, I probably have my own micro-fascist tendencies. I probably have my own problems to work out. I probably am not pure in this sense myself, right? And then, but there's also this idea of toxic masculinity in all this, right? And the idea of what it means to be a tough, strong man and all this kind of stuff, and this idea of a tradition, this traditional father figure or traditional structure that's been missing, that they really feel the need to bring back. And there's something about all this which has been, by the leftists who just see fascism everywhere, the whole dynamic of having like the strong paternal authoritarian father figure is just coded as fascism, right? But then it's interesting in this Jodorowsky movie, he presents his father as a communist who was living in Argentina, who immigrated away from the Ukraine, but like has a picture of Joseph Stalin up in his store and has the same mustache. Like it's kind of cartoonishly, like the guy is just like makes himself look like Joseph Stalin, right? And there's just something about like I don't know. I was a pretty young. This is the whole thing. Like my grandfather, in my mom's side of the family, was a Romanian guy, and then my grandmother was more Ukrainian. And there was the, so like my family kind of has this sort of ancestry, and there's something weird about like my memories of like going back to my grandma's house, grandpa's house, and that the idea, like having some fascination with Soviet Russia because of your ancestry, or like I'm saying the family themselves, right? I mean, I was too young to really comprehend it, right? But like, it's like you can imagine Eastern Europeans who immigrate and they have a whole bunch of like I got this one, right? This was one that we, after, I think maybe after my grandpa died, we might have gotten this from them. But you have books like this, A Day in the Life of the Soviet Union, right? This is, they're like but they immigrated away from Ukraine because there's obviously a lot of, they got out of there. They were more like the right Russians, right? They weren't, although, I don't know, there's some stories, maybe I got some ancestors, I don't know, I'm not going to sit and talk about my ancestry too much, right? But there's this idea of like, the idea that the head of state in some way creates this idea of like the power center, the power structure, the authority figure, the king, right? And that you as a father figure, as a man, are like, somehow, even if it's unconscious maybe, you are deriving your self-image of like who, if you want to be like a strong father figure or like the leader of your family or the boss at work, somehow you're deriving, oh, well, we live in this society which has elected this or this person, even if they're not elected, like Joseph Stalin, they rise to the top and they're a strong man and they're the strong, like there's a lot of people, for as terrible as Stalin was, for some reason there's a lot of men who are just like, I admire him for being a strong man, and like you can imagine these like old-fashioned Russians or Ukrainians as like admiring like this kind of thing where you're not even like you left the country and now you're in Canada and now you're but you're kind of like, yeah, that's who we're a bunch of tough Stalin, like that's how you build your personality, right? And with this in mind, it's like what I really hope people aren't using Trump to be like, oh, well, that's who rises to the top, so let's all just be like Donald Trump or something like that, or like let's all be, but that's, you look at how like what the way Zuckerberg and Elon Musk are trying to all just rebrand ourselves to appeal to this idea of what the power center is, right? Which is kind of like, that was kind of on my mind, which motivated me to rewatch this movie, The Dance of Reality. But like the thing about this is that we have this whole idea that we code left wing, like if you're extreme left, you're communist, and that means that you are like progressive and all this kind of stuff. But then, like in the story, that they've got his communist father, who somehow has this weird identification with Joseph Stalin, as having this real like needing to inflict pain on his son to cut his son's girly hair off so that he doesn't look like a fag or a whore or something like that. It's like, you got to cut your hair, you look like a faggot, they're gonna think you're a bitch, you know what I mean? Like that kind of like, but it's not like, it's so funny because it's like, it's not, you get the sense that like, for all this sort of like the torture of having such an old-fashioned traditionalist father, there's some kind of element of it which is like that, like maybe the father actually is doing this because he cares about his son, and that's how the father's whole belief structure about the world is that like that it's not like he doesn't have any personal, maybe because there's also this thing where it shows the father in his community, and maybe there's a lot of people that maybe he's the father isn't homophobic so much as there is, no, maybe it is. It's an interesting, it's funny how they play with it anyways, right? But there's this basic thing that it's like, in some way, you can imagine the archetype of the protector, right? That it's like, the protector does not want to see the son getting hurt, so for some reason, counterintuitively, maybe even, the solution for the protector to protect the son from getting hurt is to hurt the son, to condition him, to toughen him up, to prepare him for the future pain and all this kind of stuff, right? But he's doing this from the position of being a communist and all this kind of stuff. And later on in the movie, the father ends up fighting the fascists and even getting kidnapped and getting tortured, where they're like electrocuting the father's balls, right? So it's like the father's own image is like his map of what the world's like, is like it's a scary place where you're a communist and you got to fight the fascists, and if the fascists capture you, they're going to torture you, they're going to electrocute your balls, they're going to do all sorts of fucking weird shit to you. And so like if that's the world we're in, we're going to have to we're going to have to torture our own family. Like this is the whole thing, is you have this image of the enemy, And then you're like, in order to protect myself and protect my family from this enemy who are much more monsters than we are, we're going to have to basically create this super ego structure, which says, in order to protect myself from the monster, I have to be a monster myself, and in order to protect my son from getting hurt, I have to hurt my son. Right? So in order to protect me from getting hurt, I have to hurt myself. I have to hurt my son. I have to hurt. The whole movie is like, it's absolutely bizarre because like if you also take into consideration that Jodorowsky is like using the actors to play himself and his father as this is his son and his grandchildren, and he's basically like, I have this issue where like my family. Like, my grandmother is 100 years old, and my mom is completely unable to deal with any of her family members, or is afraid that if we go there, she's afraid that, like, you know, her family members will try to kill her or something. Like, that level of fear and paranoia, or, like, just bad blood about the old... Or, I mean, I don't know, maybe you don't want to see your family because they're old-fashioned and abusive or something like this. But, like, the way that Jodorowsky deals with this is he's like, I'm going to make a movie, a film about this, a piece of art all about this, and I'm going to use my own family, I'm going to use my son, I'm going to use my grandchildren, and basically we're just going to film. We're going to take the problem of toxic masculinity, where it's like, we're going to make you suffer to condition you to be men so that you're tough and strong and you can take the pain, and we're going to make a movie about this, and I'm going to film my son like abusing his child. Like, I'm going to get my son and get him to like punch the little kid in the face and be like, each time I punch you, I'm going to punch you harder. Just going to punch you in the face over and over again, and we're going to make a movie. Like, this is how fucking crazy Jodorowsky is, right? And it's like, in this kind of like, it's just hilarious because it's like you have this, at least have a free expression to make art that is completely this like no holds barred. Like, I mean, like Jodorowsky does not hold back at all. It's absolutely like, if you like, it's kind of thing. It's like I'm at one point in time I'm kind of thinking, you know, it's a shame that my family is so just boxed into this world where they can only, the only things that they can handle are like the most, like, I don't know, like watching Disney movies or the same Lord of the Rings or the same Star Wars or the same like Marvel. It's like if like, I don't think like I don't even know, like if I made my family sit through a Jodorowsky movie, I don't think they'd be able to. Not the one thing is like, at one point, part of me is just like, you know, it's a shame that I can't share my appreciation for Jodorowsky with my family. But then like halfway through Jodorowsky is I'm like, oh my god, it's probably good. It's probably a good thing. Yeah, thank God. That would be the most awkward thing in the world, trying to watch Jodorowsky with your family. Oh my god. But like Jodorowsky just uses his family as the actors, like, which is hilarious to me. It's like there's such Jodorowsky there's such a sort of freedom in what this guy is able to do, and it's like compared to like I'm afraid to even call my family on the phone. You know what I'm saying? Like it's like we're so uptight about like you know, like it's like it's this funny kind of thing where it's like this sort of progressive mentality being like, we don't want to be like that, we want to be better. But it just feels like, so we're just not going to talk to anybody. We're just going to like retreat basically, and just like eat lots of junk food and watch TV and just not deal with any of it. And like everything is just an escape from all this stuff that is just, we're just going to put in the, like, well, we're moving on. We're just moving on. It's all in the past. We don't have to worry about it. And this is like, we don't have a family anymore, right? So because it's and then it's like, it's also like, it's also just hilarious because it's like, I mean, you could also be like, okay, I'm, you know, there's such a bad pattern of abuse and of this toxic masculinity in the family that I don't want to have kids because I don't want to like repeat these toxic dynamics. But like Jodorowsky is just like, well, you know, I mean, but we could just make an art project out of it, right? Like, why don't we just take these toxic dynamics and just make a fucking art movie out of it, and then like turn it into this big spectacle where I'm filming my son beat his grandson? Like, great, why not? Like, because like, and And this is basically it. Like, if you take this premise of taking the issue seriously rather than just assuming your audience is a bunch of retards, a bunch of morons. So I'm sorry if I keep saying, if I said the word retard more than once. You know, I'm not gonna try to be the most like politically incorrect edgelord as possible here. I'm just trying to deal with the problem. But the issue when you get into this whole problem about Joe Rogan and the masculinity thing, you can listen to Joe Rogan talk about it, and he's talking about like doing stuff like the ice bucket challenge or something like that, or that like it's like that this he would use the words of like conquering your inner bitch, right? Like there's some part of you that is just some little bitch that doesn't want to do things, like, or that isn't tough, and that little bitch is like it's like the father who has to beat his son, right? That like, but from the father's point of view, the world is a bitch, and that it's helping the son to prepare him for how much of a bitch the world is. But the thing is, what's interesting about the dance of reality is that it's not the son who ends up getting tortured, it's the father, right? So it's like, in some way, the father knows that at some point in time, he's going to be there with the fascists electrocuting his balls, and that he is like, somehow needs to prepare himself for the torture he's going to be facing, so he has to like beat his own little inner bitch, but in order to do that, he has to take it out on his son, right? Being like, son, I'm going to have to beat the fuck out of you because I know when the fascists capture me, that's what they're going to do to me, right? And if I just make you feel all this pain, then that's going to make my little inner bitch more tough. So that when I have to have it inflicted on me, then it'll all be even. Because then maybe I'll feel like I deserve it. Because I'm just getting my karmic, what you do unto others will be done unto you or whatever, right? Like, but it's like you're just perpetuating this cycle of pain and suffering because you think that that's going to be the thing that's going to protect you from pain and suffering. But there's no, maybe that's just it. Maybe what you think is going to be protecting you from pain and suffering is just the pain and suffering. And if you just didn't do that, there'd be a lot less pain and suffering, right? But then the worry is that if you don't, they're just going to have a bunch of little fags running around, little queer boys. Oh no. And this is what's really moving politics right now, apparently. And so like a lot of this has to do with like I've been trying to avoid the culture war. I've been trying to avoid the woke, anti-woke dialectic or whatever you would say. But this is basically this is the archetypal shit that's underneath it, right? Or the big issue. And I think there's I think it kind of runs into issues similar to you've got things like therapy culture or like addiction recovery. And I mean, this is the thing, I grew up where basically my dad and his brothers and basically all the men in the family were all alcoholics, basically, right? And on top of this, it's like trying to socialize as a teenager. You know what? I mean, to be fair, the kinds of people that I hung out with were maybe not as bad as this, but you could kind of like see where people were a lot worse. There's this kind of like culture around like drinking culture, alcohol culture. That's like the more you drink, the more it's a sign of your masculinity or something like that. Or like they're having like, if somebody could just like, you could just put down like a 2-6 or you could just like impress people about how much alcohol you can tolerate. It's like some sort of like show of masculinity, but then there's like all these teenagers who end up giving themselves like alcohol poisoning because of this, right? And this is what I'm trying to say is like I think this would be an example of like actual literal toxic masculinity. I mean, not, but of course, maybe women sort of might fall into this too, but I think with men, it's like there's this obvious, it's this thing that it's like you're competing to show off something, but the thing that you're showing off isn't really an achievement. It's like who can like fall into the grave the fastest kind of thing, right? And that's kind of like that. I think that's part of what the fascist thing is that like it's kind of like what it's like you're trying to like make people compete for this thing that just kills them. I don't know if that makes sense. I mean, of course it doesn't. But there's like it's not just that. There's this kind of idea that like I think there's something about like therapy. Like I'm not totally on board uncritically with therapy culture, but there's like something about progressive values, which I think goes with this thing of like instead of this idea of that it's like to be a tough man is to show off how much you can drink, and which is also just self-destructive and numbing yourself out. It's like that therapy is sort of like getting in touch with the vulnerable feelings that are there, but that are underneath what you're trying to like numb out with your addiction, right? But it's kind of like if you're trying to do that with a bunch of men who are not just, it's not just that they've been conditioned to think a certain way, but they're trying to like actively defend this kind of mentality where the part of them that feels like a vulnerable feeling that maybe they want to cover up with an addiction or some sort of thing like that, it's like that they can't, to be compassionate towards that thing would be like giving into the inner bitch, right? That thing that wants you to be compassionate with is some kind of enemy that is thus going, like the vulnerability there puts you at risk to having people inflict pain on you. And so in order to protect against the likelihood of other people inflicting pain on you because of this vulnerable thing, the only thing you can do is inflict that pain on it yourself, right? Because in the same way that the father is protecting his son from the future, because the father, like the father isn't a fascist, he's a communist, right? But he sees the fascist as the enemy, so the father's going to beat his son to protect them, so that your son's is a tough ass by the time when he has to fight the fascists, right? But then in the sense that but then in our own sense, we have some sort of inner vulnerable part of ourselves that we have been trained just to be tough and drink and not get and to block that out. Or that if that part is there, it feels to us like our inner bitch that we just have to beat up, like basically intimidate, so that it's not going to give us any trouble, right? And that's like this sort of wound that men carry around, right? Because and that the idea that like being compassionate to that part is basically being woke, right? Or like the idea, like it also goes with this idea of wokeness in the sense that like a lot of like the main thing that the word woke came out of was police shooting black people, or also police shooting mentally ill people, right? And so it's this kind of idea that like if somebody is going through a state of mental health crisis, is it more appropriate to treat this person as somebody who needs care and sensitivity and compassion, or is this just some person who's being a bitch who needs to be fucking slapped around? You know, like, and then if the thing is, if you treat that person like a bitch who needs to be slapped around, then you're treating them with violence, and the person's going to say, oh, well, hey, look, I'm in a world that's extremely hostile. So in order to protect myself from this world that's extremely hostile, I have to be violent, right? And so it's sort of like this kind of, I find it really interesting as a man who has mental health concerns, because you're in this kind of double bind, where on one hand, there's this whole world of men, which has this code that you're not supposed to be a little bitch, you're not supposed to be sensitive, you're not supposed to be a pussy, you're supposed to be tough, you're supposed to, you know, there's this kind of like, that world is like, what wants you to be able to fight, wants you to be able to be tough, wants you to be able to like stand up. But there's this other world that says that if a person is crazy, if they're psychotic, they're a danger, they're a threat, they're like, they have to be basically watched at all times. They have to like have the state government, like a nanny state, just like control their whole life, because, and make sure they're just sedated their whole life, because if they're not sedated for like one day, they're just gonna flip out and like go crazy and violent. And it's like kind of like, yeah, but they're living in a, the situation is a bunch of people who, like, if the person's going to be like, well, I'm going to renounce violence, I'm going to instead get in touch with my vulnerable, wounded parts. You got a whole bunch of people that think, oh, you're a fucking fag, you're a pussy, right? And that this is now created, like, even fucking Mark Zuckerberg is on board with this now, apparently, right? And this is why I just gave up Facebook. You know, it's actually great because I know for the last few years I have been like, I would make posts on Facebook saying that I'm not going to post on Facebook anymore. I'm like, you know, winding it down or something, and then I get sucked back into it. But so far this year, I don't know, maybe I might have posted something once on there, but it's like given me a opportunity to just be more serious about boycotting social media, because when you see the people that run it are completely on board with this kind of like this. It's not. The thing is, what bothers me about it is not just taking sides, but taking sides in a way that reinforces the stupidity of it. Because it's like taking sides, but not even taking the conversation seriously in the first place. So you don't even care about it. You're just trying to manipulate the situation, but it's like not even manipulation that is really that invested in being taken seriously, because it's like the whole nothing, it doesn't even matter anymore, right? Or it doesn't matter to them. Well, I don't know. I don't know if this is like over. Like, it is a solar eclipse in Aries, so I don't know if I'm kind of loud and fiery for this one. I've been talking for about almost an hour. It feels like I basically expressed what I have to express. There may be more nooks and crannies to explore with this one, but I am not going to. I'll just leave it at this for now. Thanks for watching. Thanks for supporting the channel. Good luck. Good luck, America. I don't know.